The lake always looked calm in the early mornings, a sheet of glass broken only by the slow ripples of ducks paddling across. Mist hovered above the surface, turning the shoreline into something out of a painting. For most people, this lake was a retreat, a place to breathe. For me, it was home, or at least, the quiet corner of land I had invested in years ago had become my personal refuge. What I hadn't counted on, though, was her. Her name was Barbara, but everyone around the neighborhood whispered another one, Karen. And believe me, she fit it to the letter. Always impeccably dressed in garish colors that made her stand out against the subdued earth tones of the lake houses. Always carrying some clipboard or folder stuffed with papers. Always looking like she was ready to pounce on someone for some imagined rule breaking. I had met her briefly when I first bought the property. A forced handshake, a brittle smile, the kind of greeting that said, "You'll follow my rules, won't you?" And then she was gone. For a while, she didn't bother me. I thought maybe I'd get lucky. Maybe the stories about her were exaggerated. But then, one Saturday morning, as I sat on my porch sipping coffee, I saw her marching up the gravel path toward me. She didn't even hesitate, didn't knock, didn't clear her throat politely. She simply stormed up my steps as though she owned the place. "Good morning," she announced, in a tone so sharp it almost felt like an accusation. I lowered my mug. "Morning." She planted herself in front of me, one hand on her hip, the other gripping a folder. "I've been meaning to talk to you. You haven't attended any of our home meetings." I gave a small shrug. "That's because I'm not a member." Her eyes narrowed, like a hawk zeroing in on prey. "Not yet, but this property is on the lake. Everyone here must be part of the Lakeview Homeowners Association. That's non-negotiable." I leaned back in my chair, taking my time. I wasn't about to let her set the pace. "Pretty sure it is negotiable. I've read the deed. My property isn't under the HOA covenant." Her lips twitched into what was supposed to be a smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "That's a misunderstanding. You see, we've updated our bylaws. Everyone who lives on the shoreline benefits from our community standards. It's only fair that you contribute." "Updated your bylaws," I said slowly. "Not mine." Her face went a little pink. She wasn't used to resistance. People either caved to her or avoided her. I could see the gears turning as she tried to recalibrate. "Well then," she said after a pause, tapping her folder. "I'll leave you some paperwork. You can look it over and sign. The fees are due by the end of the month." I didn't move to take the folder. I just kept my gaze steady on hers. Not happening. The silence stretched between us. The ducks on the water quacked. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Her jaw clenched. "Excuse me? You heard me. I'm not joining your hoe. Not now, not ever." Her nostrils flared. For a split second, I thought she might actually explode right there on my porch. Instead, she snapped her folder shut and drew herself up taller. "We'll see about that," she said, her voice low and tight. "We'll see." She turned on her heel and stormed off, her bright orange blazer flashing like a warning beacon down the gravel path. I watched her go, shaking my head. I'd dealt with people like her before, people who lived for control, for the thrill of making others bend. What she didn't know was that I'd been through far worse battles than a whole busybody with a clipboard. But that was only round one. The following week, little things began happening. First, I got a courtesy notice taped to my mailbox. It was written in stiff legal language, claiming I was in violation of whole landscaping rules. My grass, it said, was improperly maintained. Never mind that my yard was gravel and wildflowers, and that it looked better than half the pristine but soulless lawns down the street. Then I got another notice, this one accusing me of unauthorized structures. Apparently, my tool shed counted as an eyesore under their standards. Each letter came signed, Lakeview HOA Compliance Committee, Chairwoman Barbara Mitchell. I crumpled them up and tossed them in the trash. But I knew this was just the beginning. One evening, as the sun was sinking behind the pines, I heard footsteps on my porch again. When I opened the door, she was standing there, arms crossed, lips pursed into a thin line. "This is your final warning," she said. I raised an eyebrow. Final warning for what? For refusing to comply with community guidelines. The next step will be legal action. Legal action? I repeated, almost amused. For not joining your club? Her eyes glittered. Don't be smug. We will get you into compliance. One way or another. I let out a short laugh, the kind that made her bristle. Good luck with that. She inhaled sharply through her nose, turned, and stalked off again. But this time, she didn't stop at her house. I saw her veer off toward the corner, where 2 patrol cars sometimes parked during evening rounds. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was just venting to the officers. But 15 minutes later, red and blue lights flickered through my window. I stepped outside to see a sheriff's deputy climbing out of his car, Barbara standing proudly beside him like she'd just won the lottery. "There he is," she cried, pointing at me. "That's the man. He refuses to follow our HOA rules. He's hostile, threatening. I feel unsafe." The deputy glanced between us, clearly unsure what kind of emergency he'd been called into. "Sir, is there a problem here?" I folded my arms. "Not unless you count her harassment." Barbara gasped, clutching her chest like I'd just struck her. "Harassment? I'm trying to protect this community. He's endangering property values, breaking the rules, ignoring every warning." The deputy sighed. I could tell this wasn't his first dispute call. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Ma'am, refusing to join a homeowners association isn't a crime." Her face turned crimson. But he has to. Everyone on the lake does. We voted. It's the law." "It's not," I said calmly. "And if you'd bothered to do your homework, you'd know that." The deputy gave me a look, then back at her. "Ma'am, unless he's trespassing or committing a crime, there's nothing I can do. HOA rules aren't law enforcement's jurisdiction." Barbara's mouth opened and closed like a fish. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked speechless, but only for a moment. She spun toward me, her finger jabbing through the air. "This isn't over. Do you hear me? This isn't over." I let a slow smile spread across my face. "Oh, I know. And that's the problem." The deputy shot me a half-sympathetic look before retreating to his car. Barbara stormed back toward her house, muttering under her breath. I watched her go, my arms still folded, a quiet satisfaction building in my chest. Because here was the thing she couldn't know. Barbara wasn't just my neighbor. She was also my tenant. I owned the very house she lived in. She'd been renting it for years, never realizing that the man she was trying so desperately to control was the same man who held her lease in his hands. And if she wanted to play games, well, I had the ultimate trump card. But that card, I thought, would be played at just the right moment. For now, it was enough to watch her stew, to let her think she was winning battles in a war she didn't even understand. The lake reflected the last of the orange sky as I stepped back inside, my smile lingering. This was going to be interesting. The morning after Barbara called the cops on me, the neighborhood was quiet. Almost too quiet. Usually, I'd hear the sound of kids racing bikes down the paved road, or the echo of a neighbor starting up a lawnmower. But that day, it felt like the whole street was holding its breath. When I stepped out onto my porch with my mug of coffee, I saw why. Across the street, Barbara was standing with 2 other women, whispering fiercely, their eyes darting toward me, and then away again. One of them clutched a binder, so thick it looked like it could knock out a small animal. The other scribbled notes on a yellow pad. They weren't just gossiping. They were plotting. I gave them a casual wave. They didn't wave back. Instead, Barbara's lips tightened into a thin, victorious smile, as though she'd already won some battle I didn't even know about yet. It wasn't long before the next move came. That afternoon, I found a bright orange flyer taped not only to my door, but to my shed, my mailbox, even the utility pole at the edge of my property. The paper screamed in bold letters, "Community Notice, Non-Compliant Property Owner." Below it, Barbara had listed a series of violations against me. Failure to join Lakeview HOA, unauthorized shed on property, improper landscaping, disrespect toward HOA officers. At the bottom was her signature, followed by the words, "For the good of the community." I stood there in my driveway, the orange paper fluttering in the breeze, and I couldn't help but laugh. She wasn't even trying to hide her crusade anymore. She wanted to humiliate me, to turn the neighbors against me until I bent to her will. But humiliation only works if you're ashamed. And I wasn't. I tore the flyers down, crumpled them, and tossed them into my trash bin. By the next morning, though, there were more. Pinned to trees, stapled to wooden posts, slipped under my doormat. She was relentless. And then came the letters. Thick, officious envelopes stuffed into my mailbox, each one stamped urgent. Inside, they threatened escalating fines, legal action, even liens against my property. Each letter was longer than the last, filled with copied and pasted legal jargon meant to scare me into compliance. But here's the thing. I'd been in real estate for years. I knew property law better than Barbara could ever pretend to. Her fines weren't worth the paper they were printed on. Her legal threats were empty air. Still, the harassment wasn't just annoying, it was isolating. Neighbors who used to wave now avoided my gaze. A few of them even crossed the street when they saw me coming. Barbara's poison was spreading. She was painting me as some villain refusing to play by the rules. One evening, I decided to confront her directly. I walked across the street and knocked on her door. It swung open almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting. She stood there in another of her blinding blazers, this one a harsh fuchsia that made my eyes ache. "What do you want?" she snapped. "To talk," I said evenly. Face to face, her eyes narrowed, but she stepped aside just enough for me to enter. Her living room was immaculate, almost sterile. White furniture, glass coffee table, not a speck of dust in sight. It looked less like a home and more like a museum no one was allowed to touch. On the table sat a stack of files, all labeled with my name. My stomach turned, not with fear, but with anger. She'd been compiling a dossier on me. "Impressive collection," I said, nodding toward the files. Her chin lifted. "I take my responsibilities seriously. The community depends on me to uphold standards." "Standards?" I echoed. "Or control." Her eyes flashed. "This isn't about control. This is about order. Without the hoe, this place would fall into chaos. People would paint their houses neon colors. They'd park RVs in their driveways. They'd live their lives," I cut in. "That's what you're afraid of. People living without you dictating every move." She bristled, her hands clenching into fists. "If you don't like it here, then leave. Sell your property. Go somewhere else." I stepped closer, my voice dropping. "Or maybe you're the one who should leave." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Something almost like fear. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by that familiar, smug defiance. "You think you can scare me?" she sneered. "I've dealt with men like you before. Bullies, rule breakers. You all think you're above the system, but the system always wins." I held her gaze for a long moment, then turned and walked out without another word. Sometimes silence is the most unsettling answer of all. The war lines were drawn. Over the next week, the tactics escalated. She filed noise complaints against me, even though my property was quieter than most. She called in unauthorized construction when I had a contractor repair part of my deck. She even reported me for excessive water usage, which was laughable considering I barely ran my sprinklers. Each time, I got a visit from some official, police, county inspector, utility worker. And each time, they left shaking their heads, realizing they'd been duped by another frivolous call. But Barbara didn't care. She wasn't interested in winning fairly. She was interested in wearing me down. One night, around midnight, I was jolted awake by flashing lights outside. I stumbled to the window and saw 2 sheriff's cars parked in front of my house. Heart pounding, I grabbed a shirt and stepped outside. Barbara was there, of course, standing at the edge of her driveway in her nightgown, hair in curlers, looking like she'd just discovered a murder scene. "That's him!" she cried, pointing at me with manic energy. "He threatened me. He said I should leave. I'm afraid for my life." The deputies looked exhausted. One of them muttered, "Not again." under his breath. I raised my hands, palms out. Officers, I've never threatened her. She's harassing me because I won't join her hoe. Barbara gasped, clutching her chest. Lies. He's dangerous. He's stalking me. One of the deputies turned to her with a flat stare. Ma'am, we've been out here 3 times this week already. We found no evidence of threats, no crimes committed. This needs to stop. She looked at him like he'd just betrayed her, her mouth falling open. But, but I'm the HOA chairwoman. You have to protect me. The deputy sighed, rubbing his forehead. Being in the HOA doesn't put you above the law, ma'am. That was the first time I saw the mask slip. Her face twisted into something raw, something ugly. Her voice dropped to a hiss. You'll regret this. She spat at me, eyes blazing. I'll make sure of it. I didn't flinch. I just stood there, letting the deputies see exactly who the aggressor really was. Eventually, they climbed back into their cars and drove off, leaving me and Barbara staring at each other in the cold wash of moonlight. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she turned and stomped back inside, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. I stood in my driveway, heart still thundering in my chest, and I knew this wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. This was personal. She wanted to break me, but what she didn't realize was that I had been holding back. Because while she was busy calling the cops and filing complaints, she had overlooked one critical detail: the very ground she stood on, the walls that sheltered her, the roof over her head. None of it truly belonged to her. It belonged to me. And when the time was right, I'd remind her of that in a way she'd never forget. For now, though, I let her think she still had power. Let her scramble and claw, building her little empire of flyers and threats. The higher she climbed, the harder she'd fall when the truth came crashing down. And God, was I looking forward to the fall. It started with whispers, the kind that travel faster than wildfire in a tight-knit neighborhood. By the second week after Barbara's midnight police stunt, I noticed more curtains twitching when I walked down the street. More neighbors turning their backs when I passed. Some even crossed their arms like shields, staring at me with guarded suspicion. Barbara had gotten to them. The official move came a few days later. I returned home from the hardware store to find a folded piece of paper stuck in my screen door. No bright orange flyers this time. This was typed, clean, formatted like a legal document. Across the top, bold letters read, Notice of Special HOA Meeting Agenda, addressing non-compliant property owner. I unfolded the paper and read the details. They were calling a meeting of the entire Lakeview HOA Board with one clear purpose: me. It was set for Saturday evening in the community clubhouse overlooking the lake. The notice wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. I sat down on my porch, paper in hand, and let out a long breath. This wasn't just Barbara anymore. She'd rallied the entire HOA against me. Or at least, she wanted me to think so. The irony made me smile. She still didn't know. Didn't realize she was sharpening a knife on a rope tied to her own neck. But I wasn't ready to pull that rope yet. Not until she made her move in full view of everyone. Saturday came faster than I expected. The clubhouse was buzzing when I walked in. Rows of chairs were filled with neighbors, some faces I'd known for years, others I barely recognized. The big windows overlooked the shimmering lake, but no one was paying attention to the view. All eyes were on the front of the room, where Barbara stood like a queen addressing her court. She wore a blazer in deep crimson this time, as if she were dressed for war. The clipboard in her hand slapped against her palm with every gesture. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice sharp, carrying across the room without need for a microphone. As you know, we are gathered here tonight to discuss a grave threat to our community standards. A threat posed by one man. Her hand shot out, finger stabbing toward me where I stood at the back. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I didn't flinch. I just folded my arms, letting the silence stretch. Barbara turned back to the crowd, pacing with theatrical flair. This man refuses to join our association. He refuses to pay dues. He refuses to follow the rules that keep Lakeview beautiful and secure. While the rest of us work hard to maintain property values, He mocks us with defiance. He endangers everything we've built. The murmurs grew louder. I saw heads nodding, others frowning. Some people looked uneasy, caught between loyalty to the hoe and the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Barbara slammed her clipboard onto the podium. Tonight, we must decide, will we allow this behavior to continue? Or will we stand together and enforce our standards, no matter the cost? The room erupted in scattered applause. Not overwhelming, but loud enough to embolden her. She smiled, lips curling with triumph. Then she spotted me. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" she demanded, pointing again. Dozens of eyes turned my way. I felt the weight of their stares, their judgment, their curiosity. Slowly, I stepped forward, my boots echoing against the wooden floor. I didn't rush. I let the silence build, let the tension simmer. When I reached the front, I turned to face them all. "My name is Daniel," I began, voice steady. "I've lived here for 5 years. I've paid my taxes. I've maintained my property. I've never once caused trouble for my neighbors. Until recently." I paused, letting that sink in. What changed? Did I suddenly start blasting music at midnight? Did I dump trash in the lake? Did I break the law? Few people shifted uncomfortably. "No," I said. "What changed is that one person decided I should join her club. One person decided she could dictate how I live, what I build, what I plant. And when I said no, she didn't respect my decision. She called the police. She spread lies. She tried to turn all of you against me." I turned my gaze to Barbara, locking eyes with her. She bristled but didn't back down. "This isn't about rules," I continued. "It's about control, about one person's obsession with power." The murmurs grew louder now, more divided. I saw a few neighbors nodding slowly, whispering to each other. Barbara's smile faltered. "Don't be fooled," she snapped, cutting through the noise. "This is exactly what he wants, to divide us, to weaken us. He's clever with words, but words don't pay hoe dues. Words don't mow the lawns or repair the fences. Without enforcement, this community falls apart." The crowd stirred again, restless, caught in the tug-of-war between her fury and my calm. Then a man in the second row stood. I recognized him, Mr. Ellison, retired military, a man of few words but respected by many. "Barbara," he said slowly, "you've called the sheriff out here 3 times in 1 week. Each time, they left shaking their heads. I think maybe you've gone too far." A ripple of agreement spread through the room. Barbara's face flushed crimson to match her blazer. "How dare you?" she barked. "After everything I've done for this community, I've fought to keep this neighborhood safe, respectable." "Safe?" Another voice cut and a woman near the back raised her hand. "Barbara, you had us believing Daniel was dangerous, but I've never once felt unsafe around him. I have felt unsafe with you banging on my door about my flower beds." Laughter broke out in a few corners. Barbara's eyes widened, panic flashing for the first time. "This is mutiny," she shouted. "You're letting him corrupt you. Don't you see what's happening?" I leaned forward, my voice calm but carrying. "What's happening is that people are waking up." The room buzzed with energy now, neighbors whispering, arguing, taking sides. Barbara pounded her fist against the podium, desperate to regain control. "We'll vote," she cried. "Right now. All in favor of forcing Daniel into compliance. Raise your hands." Hands went up, but not as many as she expected. Maybe a third of the room. "All opposed?" I said quietly. Another third raised their hands. The rest hesitated, caught in the middle. Barbara's face twisted, fury radiating off her. She'd expected a landslide. Instead, she'd exposed cracks in her empire. "This isn't over," she hissed, voice trembling with rage. "You think you've won something tonight? You haven't seen what I'm capable of." Her words hung in the air, heavy and bitter. Then she snatched up her clipboard and stormed out, heels clicking like gunshots against the floor. The room exhaled all at once. Conversations erupted, people debating, some relieved, others confused. I didn't stay long. I'd made my point. The seeds of doubt were planted. Barbara's reign was no longer absolute. But as I walked back to my house under the cool night sky, I knew she wasn't done. If anything, I had just humiliated her in the one place she thought she was invincible. And people like Barbara don't forgive humiliation. They double down. The war wasn't ending. It was escalating. And soon, she was going to make the mistake of pushing too far. When she did, I'd be ready to drop the truth like a thunderclap. That she wasn't the queen of this neighborhood. She was my tenant. And her throne was built on land she didn't even own. The night after the home meeting, I didn't sleep well. Not because I was worried, far from it. If anything, the night carried a strange exhilaration. The meeting had gone better than I could have dreamed. Barbara, in all her smug certainty, had walked in expecting a clean victory, her little army ready to nod along. Instead, cracks appeared in her foundation. Neighbors who'd once clapped for her now raised questions. Some even frowned when she tried to bulldoze them with that shrill voice of authority. For the first time, Barbara Mitchell had been challenged, openly, publicly, undeniably. And that kind of wound doesn't heal overnight. But people like Barbara don't lick their wounds quietly. They retaliate. They lash out like a cornered animal, striking at anything in reach. And sure enough, by sunrise, her retaliation had begun. When I stepped onto my porch to fetch the newspaper, the smell hit me before my eyes registered what I was seeing. A pile of garbage bags lay strewn across my steps, ripped open, spilling their guts everywhere. Rotting food oozed across the wood. Crushed beer cans rolled lazily against my boots. Banana peels, half-eaten chicken wings, something unidentifiable but reeking of sour milk, all of it baking under the early sun. The stench punched me in the gut. I froze, letting the scene burn into my mind. Then, slowly, I lifted my gaze. And there she was. Across the street, Barbara stood on her manicured lawn, arms folded like a general surveying a battlefield. Her lips curved into a smug little smirk, her eyes glittering with triumph. "Looks like someone's having trash problems," she called out sweetly, her voice dripping with poison. Her expectation was clear. I'd explode. I'd rant. I'd storm across the street and give her the satisfaction of watching me lose my cool. But I didn't. I just stared at her. Calm. Steady, the silence stretched between us like a taut rope. Her smirk faltered. Without a word, I pulled out my phone. One photo of the trash. Another of her, caught mid-smile, standing there like a proud arsonist admiring her own flames. Her arms shifted, just slightly. That smug certainty cracked for half a second. Then I bent down, hauled the reeking bags one by one into the bed of my truck, and shut the tailgate with a final, decisive thud. That was her first mistake. She thought petty sabotage would shake me. All it did was give me ammunition. The second mistake came later that afternoon. I was in my backyard, oiling the hinges on my shed door, when I heard voices on the other side of the fence. Two men, muttering, the sound of wood thudding against soil. Curious, I set the rag aside and walked over. What I saw nearly made me laugh. Two guys in work boots were hammering a post into the ground. Attached to it was a bold, red sign that read, "Private property HOA access only." I leaned on the fence, watching them for a moment, then cleared my throat. "Mind telling me what you're doing?" The older one wiped sweat from his brow, glancing at me. "Mrs. Mitchell told us this part of the fence line belongs to the HOA. Said we had to mark it properly." I felt a slow burn rise in my chest, but I kept my voice level. "That's not HOA land. That's my land." The younger one shifted uncomfortably. "Well, she paid us too." "I don't care what she paid you," I cut in sharper now. "You're trespassing. Pull it out. Or I call the sheriff, and you can explain why you're hammering fake signs into private property." The men exchanged uneasy looks. The older one muttered a curse under his breath, then yanked the post back out of the soil. The younger one grumbled as they hoisted it onto their shoulders and trudged away down the block. And just like this morning, Barbara was there, standing on her porch, arms folded tight. lips pressed into a hard, thin line. I smiled at her. Slow, deliberate, and tipped my head as if to say, "Score 2 for me." Her nostrils flared, but her real counterattack came that night. It was just after 10 when the blue and red glow washed across my living room walls. I groaned, dragging on my jacket, because I already knew who was behind it. When I stepped outside, 2 deputies stood in my driveway, cruiser idling. And of course, Barbara was there too, this time in her robe, hair disheveled, mascara streaking like she'd been crying for hours. "There he is," she shrieked, pointing at me with dramatic flair. "That's him. He threatened me again. He said he'd ruin me, that he'd burn my house down." I clenched my jaw, staring at her. "That's a lie." One of the deputies turned to me, his expression weary, like a man who's been through this too many times. "Sir, can we have a word?" I nodded, stepping a few feet away with him. His voice dropped low. "Look, we know she's been calling a lot. We haven't found evidence of anything criminal, but she insists you're harassing her." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "If anything, it's the other way around. Want to see photos of her dumping trash all over my porch this morning?" His brows lifted. "You've got photos?" I scrolled through my phone and handed it over. He studied the images, the garbage, the ripped bags, the perfect shot of Barbara watching with that smug grin. His expression hardened. "Yeah," he muttered. "That'll do. We'll file this." From behind us, Barbara's voice rose in panic. "What?" "No. He's making that up." The deputy turned to her, his patience gone. "Ma'am, unless you want to face charges for false reports and harassment, I suggest you stop calling us unless you have real evidence." Her mouth opened, but no words came. She stood there gasping like a fish yanked from water, mascara glistening under the cruiser's lights. And in that moment, for the first time, the power balance shifted, not just between her and me, but in front of the law. When the deputies left, Barbara stayed frozen at the edge of her driveway, trembling with rage. Her voice cracked as she screamed across the street, shrill and broken. "You'll regret this. I'll destroy you." I didn't answer. I just stood there, calm as ever, letting her words dissolve into the night air. Because I knew every outburst dug her hold deeper. Over the next week, her spiral grew frantic. Flyers accusing me of everything from vandalism to tax fraud appeared on mailboxes. HOA inspectors, handpicked by Barbara, showed up unannounced, snapping photos of my yard like paparazzi. Someone keyed my truck, gouging a jagged scar into the paint. But through it all, I stayed calm, documenting, collecting, watching the neighbors' eyes shift, the whispers grow louder. They weren't whispering about me anymore. They were whispering about her. And then, one fateful afternoon, she crossed the final line. I was in my driveway, crouched over the shed hinge with a wrench when she came storming across the street. No blazer, no heels, just raw fury. "You think you've beaten me?" She spat, eyes wide, wild. "You think you can humiliate me in front of everyone? I run this neighborhood. Do you understand?" Me, I stood slowly, wiping my hands on a rag. Calm, measured. "You don't run anything, Barbara. You just fooled people into thinking you did." Her face twisted, a mask of rage. "I'll evict you. I'll make sure you lose everything. You'll be out of here so fast your head will spin." I stepped closer, my voice dropping low, sharp as a blade. "Evict me? Barbara, you might want to check whose name is on your lease." She froze. For the first time, her certainty cracked wide open. Her eyes darted, searching my face for some clue. "What? What are you talking about?" she stammered. I smiled then. Slow, deliberate. "The house you live in. The one you scream from. The one you think you own this neighborhood from. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to me. I'm your landlord." Her mouth fell open. Shock rippled through her face, chasing away the rage, replacing it with something I'd never seen in her before. Vulnerability. "No," she whispered, shaking her head violently. "No, that's not true." "Oh, it's true," I said softly, every word deliberate. and I've got every piece of paper to prove it." She staggered back, as if I'd physically struck her. The air between us went still, heavy with the weight of truth she couldn't outrun. Then, without another word, she spun and fled across the street, slamming her front door so hard the glass rattled. I stood there in the fading light, my heart steady, calm victory settling in my chest. The war wasn't over, but the battlefield had shifted forever. Because now Barbara finally knew the truth, and she had no idea what to do with it. The days after Barbara learned the truth were some of the strangest the neighborhood had ever seen. It wasn't just her behavior, though that was erratic enough to keep everyone on edge. It was the atmosphere. A kind of charged tension hung over the lakefront, thick and inescapable, like the air before a thunderstorm. Barbara had always been loud, always been controlling, always been relentless. But now she was something else entirely. A cornered animal. And everyone knew what a cornered animal does. It bites. It started small. Flyers slipped under doors in the dead of night, all written in her unmistakable, sharp handwriting. The papers accused me of everything imaginable: fraud, tax evasion, even drug dealing. Do you want a criminal living across from your children? One read: "This man is dangerous. He lies. He cheats. He manipulates." The neighbors, who once might have taken her words at face value, now rolled their eyes. I saw a couple of kids using one of her flyers as a paper airplane. Another family crumpled theirs up and tossed it straight into the trash before even finishing the first line. Barbara noticed, of course. She noticed everything. And with every dismissal, she grew angrier. By the third day, she had escalated. I came home from running errands and found a bright red spray-painted message scrawled across my mailbox. "Landlord liar." The paint dripped, tacky and fresh, reeking in the summer sun. I didn't need to guess who had done it. The security camera I'd installed caught her in the act, skulking across the street at 2 a.m., hood up, can in hand. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I didn't scrub the paint away either. I left it there, evidence glowing bright in the daylight. The neighbors saw it too. They whispered, they shook their heads, and slowly but surely their sympathy for Barbara evaporated completely. Then came the night of the sirens. I was sitting in my living room, book in hand, when flashing blue and red lights lit up my windows. Again, my first thought was, here we go. Barbara's dialing 911 again. But when I stepped outside, I realized it was worse than I thought. 3 patrol cars were parked on the street. Deputies were out with flashlights, fanning across the lawns. A few neighbors stood on porches in pajamas, murmuring anxiously. And in the middle of it all, Barbara, wailing dramatically, her voice cracking like glass. "There he is," she shrieked the moment she spotted me. "That's him. That's the man. He broke into my house. I saw him. He threatened to kill me." The words rippled through the crowd like poison. I froze for half a second, stunned by the audacity. This wasn't a petty lie about trash or fences. This was a crime she was accusing me of, a violent crime. One of the deputies strode over. "Sir, we need to ask you some questions." I held my ground, voice calm but firm. "Ask away. Where were you in the last hour?" "Here," I said. "In my living room. Alone. Reading." The deputy studied me, skeptical. "Do you have proof?" I pulled out my phone. "I've got security cameras. One on the front porch, one on the driveway. Both with timestamps." His brow arched. "May we see?" "Of course." I opened the app, scrolled back, and there it was. My porch, empty. My driveway, empty the whole past hour. Not a soul leaving or entering my property. When I handed the phone over, the deputy's face hardened. He turned to Barbara, who was still wailing, her hands clutching her robe dramatically. "Ma'am, the footage shows he never left his property tonight." Her tears froze mid-fall. That's impossible. He was in my house. I saw him." The deputy's voice turned cold. "Mrs. Mitchell, we've warned you about filing false reports. This is your last chance. If this continues, we'll have no choice but to press charges against you." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on land. Around us, the neighbors whispered, their faces lit by the cruiser lights. They weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at her. And for the first time, Barbara seemed to realize she wasn't the hero of this story. She was the villain. But villains don't give up quietly. The next morning, I found my truck keyed so deeply the scratches carved through the paint to the metal. On the back window, someone had written in soap, "Slumlord." Again, my cameras caught her. This time, she wasn't even sneaky about it. She strutted across my driveway like she was entitled to be there, a deranged queen vandalizing the property of her own landlord. I filed the footage with the deputies, who promised they'd add it to the file. The way they said it, I could tell Barbara was a regular on their shift reports now. But the spiral didn't end there. At the next HOA meeting, a gathering she forced through sheer will, dragging a handful of reluctant neighbors into the clubhouse, Barbara snapped. The room smelled faintly of coffee and dust. Folding chairs squeaked as people shifted uncomfortably. Everyone looked tired. No one wanted to be there. Barbara stood at the front, her hair disheveled, her blazer mismatched with sweatpants. She clutched her notes like they were lifelines, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. She started strong, or at least, she tried to. "This neighborhood is under siege," she announced, voice quivering with false authority. "We are dealing with a dangerous man who threatens the safety of every family here. He vandalizes, he lies, he manipulates." "Barbara," someone cut in. It was Mrs. Klein, a soft-spoken woman who'd always been neutral before now. "Enough. We've seen the videos. We know it's you." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Barbara's face twisted. "Videos? Lies. He fabricated them." "No, Barbara," another neighbor said firmly. "You did this. You dumped trash. You painted his mailbox. You keyed his truck. You're the one harassing him, not the other way around." Her voice cracked, desperation breaking through. "He's tricked you all. He's evil. Don't you see?" But no one saw. Not anymore. One by one, the neighbors shook their heads, standing, filing out of the clubhouse. No yelling, no dramatic showdown. Just a quiet rejection. By the time the last chair scraped back, Barbara stood alone at the front of the room, chest heaving, papers trembling in her grip. And I didn't even have to speak. She destroyed herself. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, the air cool and calm, cicadas humming in the dark. Across the street, Barbara's windows were dark, blinds drawn tight. For the first time in weeks, the neighborhood was peaceful. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. She had one card left to play, and soon it would be time for me to play mine. Because in just a few weeks, her lease was ending, and I was her landlord. Her reckoning wasn't far off. Her final fall was coming, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The calendar flipped with a kind of inevitability. 3 months had passed since Barbara learned the truth, that I was her landlord, that every threat she'd screamed at me was hollow, that her castle was built on sand. Now her lease was in its final weeks, each day peeling away like bark from a dying tree. And Barbara Mitchell, once queen of the Hoe, was unraveling in full public view. Her downfall wasn't sudden. It was slow, painful, humiliating. Neighbors stopped answering her calls. Her flyers went straight to recycling bins. The police stopped responding to her frantic reports with anything but weary sighs. Even the children, once afraid of her, mocked her from the sidewalks. She went from feared to pitied, from pitied to despised. And still, she fought. Her front porch became a fortress of boxes she refused to pack. Curtains stayed drawn at all hours. Some nights, lights flicked on at 3 a.m., shadows pacing frantically behind them as if she was plotting, scheming, searching for an escape route from the walls closing in on her. But there was no escape. Time doesn't bargain, not even with tyrants. The first true crack came in the form of another letter. I found it in my mailbox, scribbled on lined paper, ink smudged from a shaking hand. "You don't have to do this. I know I've made mistakes, but I've lived here for years. This community needs me. Without me, it will fall apart. Please reconsider." The words stank of desperation, but for a fleeting second, I felt a pang of sympathy. Until the next day, when another letter came. This one wasn't begging, it was venomous. "You'll regret this. I'll ruin your reputation. I'll sue. I'll make sure you lose everything." The contradiction was almost sad. She was oscillating between bargaining and rage, like someone drowning who couldn't decide whether to flail or reach for a hand. But no one was reaching. Not anymore. The final week before eviction was unlike anything the neighborhood had ever seen. Barbara stopped wearing her bright blazers. She stopped showing up to home meetings. She stopped mowing her lawn. The woman who once fined others for having a dandelion in their grass now lived in a house choked by weeds. It was symbolic, almost poetic. Her kingdom was decaying around her, and she was powerless to stop it. Still, she tried one last time. It was a Tuesday evening when I came home to find her waiting on my steps. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes mismatched, her eyes sunken from sleepless nights. She looked small. Not the Barbara who had once strutted through the neighborhood barking orders. Not the Barbara who had called the cops on me a dozen times. Just a woman, stripped of her armor. "I need to talk to you," she said, voice trembling. I nodded. "Go ahead." She swallowed hard, clutching her arms. "Don't evict me. Please. This house. It's all I have. I can change. I'll stop with the hoe. I'll stop everything. Just don't make me leave." Her voice cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. For a long moment, I stared at her. I almost felt pity, almost. But then I remembered the garbage bags, the vandalism, the nights of false accusations, the way she'd tried to ruin me with nothing but spite. I shook my head. "You had your chance, Barbara. 3 months of it. And you used it to dig yourself deeper." Her lip trembled. She reached out a hand, as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back. "Pack your things," I said firmly. "Your lease ends in 7 days, and there will be no renewal." The terror turned to fury in an instant. Her face twisted, voice breaking into a hiss. "You'll regret this. I'll destroy you." I didn't flinch. I didn't shout. I simply turned, walked inside, and closed the door. Her scream echoed against the wood, high and ragged, a sound more pitiful than terrifying. The day of her eviction arrived like a storm cloud that had been gathering for months. A U-Haul rumbled into her driveway early in the morning, its orange sides glaring in the sun. Movers arrived, stacking boxes on the curb. Her furniture, her knickknacks, her trophies of control, all exposed, all carried out for the world to see. Neighbors peeked from their porches. Some openly watched, sipping coffee. Others whispered in clusters. None offered to help. The woman who once ordered them around now stood abandoned, exiled, stripped of her crown. Barbara hovered by the movers, barking orders that went ignored. Her voice was hoarse, cracking from days of shouting at a world that no longer listened. At one point, she spotted me on my porch, leaning back with a cup of coffee. Her face went pale, then flushed red. She marched across the street, trembling with rage. "This isn't over," she spat, jabbing a finger at me. "You think you've won? You haven't seen the last of me." I sipped my coffee calmly, met her eyes, and said, "Yes, I have." She froze, stunned by the quiet certainty in my voice. No shouting, no anger, just truth. Because deep down, she knew it was over too. The last box disappeared into the truck. The movers slammed the door shut. Barbara climbed into the passenger seat, shoulders hunched, her face turned away from the neighbors who had once feared her. The truck rumbled to life, tires crunching over gravel, and slowly rolled down the street. No one waved. No one called goodbye. They just watched in silence as the self-proclaimed queen of the lake drove away in defeat. When the truck vanished around the corner, the neighborhood seemed to exhale all at once. Children laughed again, dogs barked freely. The lake shimmered under the afternoon sun, calm for the first time in months. I leaned back in my chair, finishing my coffee, and allowed myself a small smile. Barbara Mitchell was gone. The neighborhood was free, and I hadn't needed to scream, threaten, or retaliate. I had simply been patient, patient enough to let her destroy herself. That night, the stars shone clear over the lake. The water rippled softly, carrying away the echoes of Barbara's rain. I stood on my porch, listening to the quiet, and felt something I hadn't felt since this war began. Peace. Because sometimes, victory isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's silent. It's the knowledge that the person who tried to break you has crumbled under their own weight. That, in the end, you didn't need revenge. You just needed to wait. Checkmate.